Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in educational settings. Hi, my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I am a senior lecturer at Bath Spa University, an associate lecturer at the Open University, and an independent writer, speaker and consultant for the critical early years. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting Oracy in primary and early years settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. In this episode, I'm delighted to introduce Amy Gaunt as today's guest. Welcome to the podcast, Amy. How are you today?
Thanks, Shaddai. It's great to be here. I'm very well, thank you.
Brilliant. And before we get started, perhaps you could just give a short introduction to yourselves for our listeners.
Thank you. So I'm Director of Learning, Impact and Influence at Voice 21. Voice 21 is the national Oracy education charity. So we're working with approximately 1,100, soon 1,200 schools across the UK to support them to embed high quality Oracy education. I've been there for about 8 years. Before that, I was a primary school teacher, both in London and also internationally.
Excellent. And in this episode, we are continuing our focus on Oracy, going beyond definitions and the benchmarks to look at more practical strategies that teachers might want to deploy within their classroom contexts. Now, Amy, I'm familiar with things such as debate, drama and storytelling. Perhaps you could share a bit more from your understanding about what activities are most useful for supporting Oracy in the classroom.
Right, so debate, drama, storytelling are all sort of brilliant opportunities to develop students' Oracy skills, and we'll definitely encourage teachers to think about how they can incorporate those within their classroom. I think the main thing when it comes to those opportunities for talk is making sure that it's not just kind of providing those opportunities, but actually you're sort of really deliberately and explicitly teaching students the skills that they need to be able to do that really, really effectively. And then thinking kind of as students move through school, how you're supporting students to develop those skills that they need to engage in those types of talk and how they're getting better at those as they move through school as well.
Debate is a really important critical thinking skill for life, isn't it? And I'm thinking about my role as a lecturer in higher education and what we ask of students in terms of being able to present and talk and think critically and argue with others in a productive manner. So it feels really important that teachers are facilitating opportunities to do that in schooling contexts too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly when I was teaching, debate can be there's so many brilliant contexts for debate, but I think as a teacher, knowing how to do that really effectively can be really, really tough. And there are loads of brilliant resources out there. There are great organisations, so Voice 21, but also, for example, the English Speaking Union, Noisy Classroom, who are all focused on debate and have brilliant resources to support teachers to embed debate really well into their classroom. There are great sort of structures and things that you can use to do that really, really effectively.
There's also drama, storytelling, and perhaps more artistic or creative methods that teachers might be able to deploy. I'm wondering about teachers who are listening now who might feel less comfortable with those non-traditional activities and methods, and what tips would you give to them to be able to employ these Oracy strategies in their classroom?
It's a tough one. Yeah, I think sometimes, particularly if you're a secondary school teacher and you've got your kind of subject specialism, suddenly thinking about, right, how am I going to do some drama or storytelling in my classroom might feel tricky. I think what I would say to those teachers is to really think about what are the kind of contexts and opportunities for Oracy that really align with what Ruth Ashby calls like the unique sort of quest of your subject. So it's not about kind of transplanting kind of storytelling into the science classroom, for example, where that might not be appropriate, but it's thinking about what are the kind of, how can I match Oracy with my subject? What does it mean to kind of speak, listen and communicate in these really sort of disciplinary ways? And what might a really effective context for talk look like in my classroom, whether it's really focusing, for example, in the chemistry classroom about the language of explanation and explaining how you might get someone to engage in a science experiment, for example, whether it's in a biology. Gosh, this is showing my own my own lack of knowledge around science, but having a debate around climate change, for example. So it's thinking about ways that really support Oracy, that really supports the subject that you're teaching, and how you can sort of integrate those really, really seamlessly, rather than kind of cooking up sort of random opportunities, making sure they're really aligned with the sort of teaching and learning goals of your subject.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'll share at this point that I had a lesson from a drama teacher who came to our university to give us some teaching tips to teach in more creative ways. And we had to, with my senior leadership team, act out the rise and fall of the Conservative Party through mime, which was quite an eye-opening experience for me. It was one of many kind of drama strategies that we were encouraged to use with our students, and certainly taken a few of those away in terms of talking heads. I don't know if you're familiar with that, and similar things that ask students to be podcasters and interview people on subjects. So there's certainly a lot of ways in which you can implement speaking opportunities within your classroom without them feeling forced, I guess.
Yeah.
That's requires a lot of planning and time in terms of the curriculum approach throughout the whole year, and perhaps there's a need to think long term about specific themes and topics you're introducing. So yeah, that for me feels really important. I guess you would agree with that, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess if we've talked about kind of what happens in individual classrooms, and when you're thinking about the curriculum across the whole school, it's really useful to kind of zoom out and think about a child's kind of journey through school, how they arrive in reception, where you want them to be when they leave in year 6, when they arrive in year 7, how you want them to leave, at the end of school in year 11 or year 13, and what's your sort of journey to get them there in terms of Oracy. And at Voice 21, we've got a set of school benchmarks that we have that go alongside our teacher benchmarks that sort of set out the sorts of things that you should be thinking about as a school leader, about how to kind of make sure you're providing your students with high quality Oracy education. And one of those is about having a sustained and wide ranging curriculum for Oracy. And those two words, sort of sustained and wide ranging, are really sort of deliberately chosen. So making sure that it's not something that you do, for example, in secondary schools in year 7, when students come in, we see lots of schools that have a discrete Oracy curriculum in year 7, which is great. They've discrete Oracy lessons. They sort of focus on the Oracy skills that students will need to be really, really successful in secondary school. That's brilliant. But what we also need to make sure that we're doing is then sustaining that focus on Oracy through the curriculum throughout a child's time at school as well. So it's got to be sustained. It can't be something that's done as part of a drop down day once or twice, during a child's time at school. And then wide ranging as well is also really important. So that's about making sure that you've got that kind of breadth of Oracy opportunities, that we're really helping to develop students' kind of agility when it comes to speaking, listening and communication. So they've got opportunities, to engage in debate, to do podcasts, to engage in expressing and performing. They have opportunities to negotiate and make change. So that you're really thinking about how you're kind of, I guess, building their Oracy muscles, as it were, through all these different kind of contexts and opportunities for talk, and that you're plotting those really deliberately within sort of different subjects as well.
Yeah, that for me, in terms of that journey, developing your Oracy muscles is really important. I'm thinking about the transitions that children will go through from nursery to reception, from primary and secondary school. Their crucial points are often good practice, for many reasons might get lost. So I'm wondering what schools can do to make sure that they're learning from the nursery schools, the children who are joining that school, and that they're passing that learning about Oracy on to the secondary schools. How can those transitions be supported better?
Yes, we've actually done quite a lot of work on this at Voice 21. We've done a few, we're in the middle of a research project with a group of schools in Worcestershire at the moment, where we're looking at kind of the role of talk at that sort of transition between primary and secondary school. We've done another project, Voice of Vocabulary, which really focused on that transition between primary and secondary as well. And there's loads of things that we've learned about good practice in terms of getting, secondary school teachers and primary school teachers together, getting them to go and see each other's practice. But specifically in terms of Oracy, we've been focusing on, year 7 at the moment and really thinking about how schools can embed, how secondary schools can kind of start a child's secondary school journey in a way that is really, really Oracy rich, that we're kind of setting the expectation for children to be able to kind of join in, to participate in lessons, that we're providing lots of opportunities to do that. We're only partway through that project, so we're going to be releasing a report on that next year, but some of our early findings are really exciting. So we're hearing from one of the schools in the project that their attendance in year 7 has gone up dramatically this year. And they credit that to a focus on Oracy, because students are much more engaged in their learning, which is really exciting. And especially, I think this week, I'm not sure when this is going out, but there's been a report released by Impact Ed this week that looks at that kind of engagement and how it sort of falls off a cliff as students move into secondary school. And I think that a focus on Oracy has a really, really important role to play with getting students feeling really invested in school.
Great. I'm sure we'll link those reports as soon as they're available on the podcast. I'm also thinking about extracurricular activities and how they can serve to support Oracy skills in young children. Of course, not every single school will have the same extracurricular activities, but I'm wondering, based on your experience working with schools, what's proved most effective and what schools can do to facilitate more Oracy learning within those extracurricular activities.
Yeah, so we're really passionate about making sure that Oracy education is an entitlement for every child. So I think there's something in me that's a bit wary sometimes about kind of extracurricular activities, because often it's kind of very self-selecting, the students that kind of have the opportunities to engage in those. And I think Oracy provision can't be solely delivered through kind of extracurricular opportunities. It needs to be something that's available to everybody. So with that sort of caveat, I think it's quite nice to not think about kind of extracurricular opportunities, think almost about co-curricular opportunities. So how all students can have the opportunities to engage in those kind of those moments around Oracy that kind of sit beyond the classroom. And there are a few different ways that our schools think about those. So really thinking about kind of opportunities for students to engage in, all those student leadership positions like student council, and they're a really great context for Oracy, but really thinking about how we can kind of democratise those opportunities so that all students are getting the chance to engage with those. Assemblies are a really great way that we can develop Oracy beyond the classroom. So lots of the schools that we work in implement talk-rich assemblies. So they break away from that kind of traditional structure of, the head teacher talking at the front and all the children sort of sitting in rows. They get children sat in circles, talking about, the traditional things that you would talk about in assembly. So whether it's, well-being, the school values, all those sorts of things, but getting students talking about them in groups. It's a great way to model practice to other teachers across the school. If you've got a really experienced Oracy practitioner delivering those assemblies, students then have the opportunity to sort of stand up and present their thinking, to the whole of their year group or their key stage, for example. So that's a really nice way to build Oracy beyond the classroom. Other things that our schools do are kind of thinking about parents' evenings, for example. So traditionally, obviously, that's the teacher sort of talking about the student. Often, they're not there sometimes. And sometimes what our schools have done is taken one parents' evening a year, flipped it on its head, and get students to actually present their learning and their learning journey that year to their parents. So it becomes a great opportunity for Oracy. The teacher, the parents listen, they ask questions, and it becomes this really kind of powerful milestone moment for students in terms of their Oracy. And parents absolutely love it as well. You often hear parents saying, like, I've asked them every single day what they've done at school, and they've never told me, and suddenly, they're talking to me really passionately about something they're really proud of that they did in maths, and they get quite emotional talking about that. So there's loads of things that you can do where you can kind of sort of flip it, I guess, and think, how could this be a moment for Oracy? We're doing World Book Day. How could we actually have a focus on Oracy as part of this? We've got a big event at school. How could we make this have more of a focus on Oracy? Can we get students comparing it, for example, instead of the head teacher or the teachers? So you're just signalling to students that actually Oracy is really, really important, and you're creating these sort of opportunities beyond the classroom. But it doesn't all have to sit in a kind of after school club, if that makes sense. Although they are obviously very, a great thing to have sort of in addition as well.
Yeah, I love the way you're kind of reframing that to co-curricular rather than extracurricular. That for me feels really important, and we'll certainly talk much more about strategies to support parents in the next episode. But for now, I think that's a really useful place to close off, having looked at the different ways in which we can use activities like drama, storytelling, or everyday artistic practices to support Oracy in the classroom. So thanks so much for that, Amy.
Thank you.
I would like to say a huge thank you to our guest Amy for joining us and providing us with such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Dr. Shaddai Tembo, and Amy Gaunt. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and to access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.